Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here in this virtual space and joining tonight's conversation with artists Joy Episalla and Suzanne Silver, which will be moderated by curator Margaret Tedesco. My name is Anna Saigi, and I am the director of Slash, the nonprofit art gallery located in Dogpatch, San Francisco, on the unceded land of the Ramatonish Ohlone people. Before we start, I'd like to mention that live captioning is available and you can enable it by clicking on the closed captions CC at the bottom of your screen. Tonight's conversation will be followed by a short Q&A session, so please submit your questions via the Q&A function. The conversation, including the Q&A, will be recorded, so if you wish to remain anonymous, please submit your questions anonymously. This event is happening in conjunction with An Opera of Whispers, the site-specific exhibition curated by Margaret Tedesco, featuring works by Joy Episalla, Suzanne Silver, and Sivan Silver-Swartz within the Slash Library. As some of you may know, Slash Library is our gallery's unique entry space with wooden bookshelves that supports guest creators and artists. The exhibition is on view through March 23rd, 2024. Before we hear more about the exhibition and the works, I'd like to introduce the artists and the curator. Joy Episalla is a New York-based interdisciplinary artist whose work repositions photography and the moving image into the territory of sculpture. She has been exhibiting in the US and internationally since the 1980s, including at MoMA PS1, Space and ICP in New York, ICA Philadelphia, Centre Pompidou, and Palais de Tokyo in Paris. Writing about her work has appeared in The New Yorker, Artforum, The New York Times, and Two Coats of Paint. Episalla is a founding member of the queer art collective Fierce Pussy. They're represented by Tibor de Nagy Gallery in New York. Suzanne Silver makes drawings, paintings, objects, and installations where unexpected materials are combined to create a visual language that is open to multiple readings. Silver has exhibited her work in solo and group exhibitions in the US and internationally, including in France, Italy, and Israel. Her work is in the collection of the Centre Pompidou in Paris and the Jewish Museum in New York, and her artist book, Black Lists, White Lists, was published by Logan Elm Press. Silver is an associate professor of art at The Ohio State University. Margaret Tedesco is an artist, independent creator, and designer who has collaborated with artists, writers, choreographers, and filmmakers for over 3 decades. In 2007, she established Second Floor Projects, an artist-run exhibition and publishing imprint, and received the Southern Exposure Alternative Exposure Awards. Second Floor Projects has participated in Printed Matters, New York and Los Angeles Art Book Fairs, the San Francisco Art Book Fair, Berlin Art Book Fair, Cadiz, and Southern Exposure's book fairs, and SF Poma's printed publics exhibitions. As an artist, Tedesco has exhibited nationally and internationally. And with all that, I will turn over the conversation to Joy, Suzanne, and Margaret. Thanks so much for all of you for being here.
Hi. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I will begin by thanking the Slash team, Anna, Maxine, F.A., and Tuche for their lovely invitation and support of my vision. Joy Episalla, the artist Joy Episalla, and Suzanne Silver and composer Sivan Silver-Swartz, and to Joey Tang and Pam Martin for their encouragement and support, as always. From foldograms to photograms, between photography and sculpture, Joy Episalla's cameraless works break the rules of the darkroom protocol. Suzanne Silver's urgent and poetic wordplay missives both call on the promise of new manifestations for future contexts. So let's begin by getting acquainted with your thoughts on the title, An Opera of Whispers, and the unique works chosen for the exhibition, their site specificity within the / library, and the correspondence and contrast between your works.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, yes, and I extend my thanks to the whole team as well, and to Joey Tang for being the linchpin in this whole enterprise. So yeah, I was really intrigued by the title. It was really a springboard for the show, for what I included in the show, and for Sivan's musical compositions. I mean, the word opera means work as well as the musical spectacle that's usually more grand or extravagant, but the idea of an opera of whispers was really a lovely paradox, and dealt with differences in sound. Also, I had been using the word whisper in some of my work, and the idea of breath, the artist's breath and breathing, and as it connects to whispers. So I really felt like we were on the same wavelength. And Sivan responded directly. I'm kind of talking for him, but from what I understand, he decided to use a Baroque opera by Jean-Baptiste Lully because Sivan has a harpsichord and he's interested in just intonation or microtones. So he tuned it to part of, he adjusted or adapted some of Lully's opera and changed the tuning, so it's perhaps the sounds become unfamiliar to us. So he was responding directly to the idea of the opera, and I was responding more as opera meaning a work and something to do with the whispers. But the library, I mean, this is fantastic. I mean, with all the shelving units, the library is a site of knowledge and learning, and my work does deal with language and archives and collections and sound as material and imagination. So it was really the perfect site for this work.
I'd also like to thank everybody at Slash and thank Margaret especially for bringing us all together, and for Joey Tang, because he's just a marvelous human being and has made such a difference in all of our lives. I think the library space is unique, not only for the bookcases, but libraries and books and things like that have played into some of my earlier work a lot. And so being in a site like that immediately was interesting to me. And sharing the library space with Suzanne was very organic. We were both, I think, in sync with each of the works and how they needed to breathe and how they needed to occupy the space. And I think there's a rich dialogue between the works and the way each of us use and manipulate our materials, the consideration of where and how the works are placed. There's a playfulness. I think there's an openness to what's happening in the moment with how one works within the installation process. And there's also this rhythmic sound. It's very quiet. There's this quality between the works and how they reside and resound in the space, which is like a whisper. And so I think that also somehow for me pertains to time travel and transformation. And I think both of our works have the ability to transform because of their ways in which we use the site as the determination of how the works will be placed, depending on where that is.
Yeah, and I realized I didn't address that part of your question, Margaret. I'm happy to hear what Joy said. And the other thing that I really like about Joy's work, which resonates perhaps with mine, is that they're site responsive. So it doesn't have to be not site specific per se. And we each responded to the site and responded to each other's work and respected each other's work and space. And the idea that the work is not fixed, that it can transform, is something that's really exciting, I think, in Joy's work, which I try to adhere to in principle as well.
And yours as well, yeah, very much so.
Would you like to walk us through a bit of the work in the exhibition now? Is that possible?
We think it's possible. Is this one. So what you're seeing are 3 of my works that are in our exhibition. And so over on your most left side of your screen would be where you'd walk in the door. And so that light is coming from outside, which was nice to have natural light. All 3 of these are foldograms, which means they're silver gelatin objects. I'm using the process of photograms, chemicals, cameraless, negativeless, and I'm using silver gelatin black and white photographic paper as the base material for all the works that I'm making for the past probably over 10 years now, longer. I'm manipulating the surface of the paper. I'm cracking the emulsion. I'm using the chemicals not necessarily in the right order. They're exposed sometimes to daylight, to darkroom light. It all depends. I heat them. I use a torch on them. And so you get not only a variable surface and coloration, but they have the ability to change shape. And so this is just one iteration. This is its second iteration, this foldogram. I can answer other questions later. This is another view. Here's a close-up of the surface. So where you're seeing like small white lines, those are actually the emulsion cracked and the white substrate of the paper showing through. This is another one. It's pretty large. It's about 42 by maybe 5 feet. And this one's a very small one. It's only like 8 by 10.
Okay, so this is the view of my work in the show. And again, I really gravitated towards those library shelves and the possibility of scoring or composing within that space. So there is a sentence diagram on the floor. The night stars were blinking in Morse code, and language. I guess, I guess the question also was how early works may have led to the current work, and language has been important in my work for a long time, and plays an important role in my whole family. My daughter who parsed that sentence for me, was trained as a linguist, and my husband knows lots of dead languages. And of course, Sivan knows the language of music. So I often use alphabets and codes and ciphers in my work. So the sentence diagram is like a piece of found poetry, depending on how it's read. So there's a metal version of it on the floor, and then glass speech bubbles, aluminum foil, punctuation marks, dots and dashes and question marks and colons, semicolons, etc. And megaphones. I'm trying to remember what I have here. Yeah, so both actual glass megaphones, and these were thanks to the gaffers, the glass blowers at the Ohio State University, who you can just go in and give them an idea and a sketch, and they'll execute it for you, which is fantastic. So the glass is thanks to them, and the sentence diagram is thanks to the technicians at the West Campus with the plasma cutter. Here's the view of the sentence diagram. Actually, this one is from my studio floor, I believe, and then versions of it so I'm so happy to be in this show with Joy, because her photographs, I've admired them for a long time. And it's so process oriented. Mine is sort of quasi process oriented. I'm really interested in what happens in the darkroom, and I'm a relative newcomer to the darkroom. But this idea of letting things happen and time and accidents and how they might contribute is important to me. Yeah, just I guess yeah, just here's another example of a sentence diagram, but hand cut out of thin aluminum sheeting, and just wordplay. Again, older work, but still, I think, in concert with what's happening in the space. I think. Now, we may, I guess, Margaret, did you have another question for us?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I wasn't sure if you were finished yet. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to jump ahead from the sequence that I sent you and just say, we are seduced by the materiality of the works and their residue. Can you both speak as it relates to materiality as messenger? With joy, how the works perform and compose in private, time-based, accumulating, morphing in secret, imbued with spirit, leaving a residue of scars, and Suzanne's wordplay, puns, palindromes, anagrams, sentence diagrams, punctuation, and coded language such as Morse code and semaphore signaling, missives sending messages, the use of sound, and the unexpected materials such as the aluminum foil. I mean, I know that there's a little redundancy in part of what I'm asking as you answered before, but if you want to elaborate.
So I like this idea of materiality as messenger. That's a really nice phrase and something that I've just been thinking about since you sent us the questions, just thinking of that as not only an idea, but as an activity. And a couple of things that I've realized over time with the foldograms is that my impression from talking to people who view them, that they're not sure what they're looking at. And that the work slips between the perception of what the eye observes as volume and surface and what that might signify, and then how there's this sort of intervening space of time where I think the work is slow, or what I'm hoping to do is slow the viewer down so that they do try and look and figure out what they're seeing in a sense, and what's not immediately apparent, again, gets back to the idea of almost a whisper as opposed to a loud command. And I feel like I'm subverting what one might expect through how the sculpture reads visually. The work's materiality and its texture informs the viewer's read to make associations with not only what they're looking at, perhaps though the work reads heavy or in weight, or it reads hard or shiny, and that in fact that's subverting of its actuality, of it being actually lightweight and malleable. And so there are these two cross purposes, almost they're happening simultaneously, which I find really interesting and exciting. And I'm hoping that this way of subverting what you think you perceive makes for the viewer to question, opens up new possibilities and ways of seeing, I think.
Yeah, and I like the fact, Margaret, that you mentioned that you singled out aluminum foil as one of the materials, because it's something I gravitated towards and I use it often. I think because it is something you can find in everybody's kitchen. It's an everyday material, and I like working with vernacular and the quotidian. But also, it harks back to a piece I saw as a child. I think it was at the Whitney. Now it's at the Smithsonian. James Hampton's Throne of the Third Heaven, the nation's Millennium General Assembly. And it's this fantastic installation that he made in secret over the years in his garage, but it's all this aluminum foil, I think silver foil maybe, and gold foil and all sorts of things. It's just an incredible piece. And I was mesmerized by it. And I think in a certain way, the foil relates back to that, you know, kind of joy of this discovery. But it's also very malleable. I can write things quickly. It shows, you know, by hand, and they can be transformed into all sorts of things. The felt is a sound buffer. I mean, it's actually used for soundproofing in rooms. I have the word silent in felt cut out, and it gets stronger. It's almost like it starts loud.
Oh.
Sorry, is there a problem?
Oh yeah, just for a second, you cut out a few times.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, more faintly. Go ahead and speak.
Okay.
Yeah, I think when you come closer, it was better. Yeah.
Okay, when I use felt, it's actually material that's used for soundproofing as a buffer in rooms. And then glass is just a magical medium, and I like the transparency and the visibility, invisibility, the play there. And I work with material as both tool and metaphor. I mean, it wasn't always the case. I think probably started with the Dadaists and or even Duchamp's dusk reading, you know, and then on broken glass, where material might signify, it might have meaning beyond its functional use. So I like playing with that and using materials that work metaphorically.
I'd also say that both of us, the hand is really important. These are not works that are in multiple, right? They are, you know, handmade, in fact. They can't be duplicated. And because of their abilities to change, that also keeps it always sort of a step ahead in terms of any kind of duplication or, you know, that way of recording.
Yeah, you both have a relationship to word, image, sound as a recurring theme. And can you speak also to the poetics related to the body?
Yeah, when thinking about that, I the only ways I can respond are maybe the action of making the work. It's in a sense, it's like a performance, but it's a private performance. It's rarely anyone else who sees me doing it. Although it's interesting, sort of, you know, that's the solo, and then we were in chorus with each other when Joy and I were installing in the same space. But usually it's a more private act, but of course the body is involved. I mean, especially in terms of choreographing, you know, placing the objects in a given space. But in a sense, you know, I started out many years ago as a figurative painter, and then the figure dropped out, and so did the paint. But I do think the body is still involved, you know, in terms of maybe touch and, you know, the ears, the eyes. But it might be the performance aspect, the performance of making, the process where the body comes into play now, currently.
I'd say for me, the body is constantly a participant in a multiple of ways, from securing and occupying queer space and working from the queer body to the little performative actions of manipulating the silver gelatin paper to become the silver gelatin object, and for it to become its next iteration. So I'm constantly involved in manipulating the sculpture in a sense, so that yeah, there's this real performative aspect to that.
So can maybe we can go back a little time. Can you both speak about the early works and what led you to making the current work? And I don't know if you put some illustration together for
That's
that
next.
question. Okay.
Okay, now this is also a sentence diagram. Again, the kind of the found poetry involved, if you don't know the order of it, that you can read it in different ways. This is in the show. Oops. You see me?
No,
No.
but that's okay. Just keep going.
Okay, well, there we go. Okay. So this is her earlier work that uses different forms of communication. So these codes and ciphers, semaphore signaling, and maritime signal flags. So it does relate to other forms of communication that I'm using in the current work at Slash, but I think here there's some kind of structure or scaffolding that you see on the floor, the arms of semaphore signaling, and I am actually signaling as something specific. They're mostly distress symbols. I started this in 2016. You can remember what happened then and why I might have images of distress. So these flags, again, they signify, but they're also abstractions. So you may have to decode it, or if you don't decode it, hopefully there's something of interest there nevertheless. So on the floor, I mean, specifically showing you this one, because you might recognize some of the elements. Here's another view that pointing. The large canvas stuffed ball is in the Slash show. It was part of this Morse code. There are 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots, 3 dashes, and that's SOS, or that's a major distress symbol. So I'm kind of recycling and certainly cannibalizing my own work, and it shows up in various ways, including in a different arrangement, a different configuration, because I am responding to the site, and it's deconstructed from the Morse code SOS. Now those shapes, then there are so many aluminum foil balls in the Slash show. Again, it's quite versatile as far as I'm concerned. It's made part of my vocabulary, either as punctuation marks or balls of various sorts, and bodily or playful, and they appear in different work. This is slightly earlier, and this is a photogram made with added balls or dots to another configuration. This is also Morse code. I mean, I remember that I was signaling, I was conveying very specific ideas, but I don't remember. I may have written it down somewhere. I don't really recall what I was so intent on signaling. So that's kind of ironic or kind of interesting, perhaps, because the formal elements are what remain. I substituted this. I mean, I used forms that were either dot or dash shapes and substituted works of my own making. And this is just a scene in my studio. So you see sort of, it's like an inventory, sort of the ingredients, some of the elements that I use, including the idea of the speakers platform. Again, different megaphone, different from a couple of megaphones, different from the one in at Slash, and the speech bubble, made from aluminum foil, flat and 3D. And here, thanks to the gaffers at Ohio State, I have a glass drum, which is amazing. I couldn't bring it with me, but I love this idea again of its invisibility, and the contradictions of having glass as the medium. I remember there was a Mona Hatoum baby's crib in glass, and there's Kiki Smith's sperm in glass. So glass is kind of an incredible medium, versatile in so many ways. And this is a felt drum. I spoke about the use of felt, and the felt is not at Slash, but the gray version of Silence is. And yes, actually this corresponds more, I think, for later. So let's go to Joy's work.
I think we're just going to flip through these really quick. Whoop. So my practice has always been concerned with both photography and the moving image and pushing that into a sculptural zone. So even in the early work where I was using representational imagery, I was using also this idea of the film frame, or, you know, the spot. When you saw a piece of film, whether it be from a camera or for a moving image, you know, the frame. So it started, I would always was incorporating those ideas from early on. Like this piece is from the early 90s. It's based on these photographs of two women together who happened to be my grandmother's sister and another woman. And it was me rephotographing these very old photographs and looking for the moment of touch. So I was sort of trying to find the history there, or find the queer history there, perhaps, or, you know, look into these spaces. And so that was where things sort of started. And then I was photographing very mundane, as you say, you know, everyday objects. And again, here there's a repetition in the image. And I was mounting these to very thick plexiglass. And so they sat on the floor and they leaned against the wall. So it was this way of trying to push the two-dimensional into the three-dimensional. And I'll just show a couple more examples of that. And here I was cutting the photographs apart, and they are all mounted as well to plexi, and they could be in different organizations and different ways of laying them out. And these fragments, the idea of fragmentation has always also been something I'm really super interested in. You can see that now, I think, in the foldograms. This was a garage door that I did to take up on an entire wall. This was on aluminum. This was from a piece called Removed, where this couch piece was cut apart into 5 pieces. These are the skins from the couch, and they were laid out almost like archipelagos on the floor. They can also have different ways of installing them depending on, again, on the site. This is from video from that. Anyway, you get the idea that. So I think what's happened with the work is I've moved away from representation, because I recognize that the photographic paper, the piece of paper, is an object, and that I didn't have to find an image or make an image, but that the process of using the paper would then become the object, the silver gelatin object. So, you know, at a certain point, the lights went on. I was like, wait a second here, you know, back up. Let's look at this, you know, so something that I'm very familiar with, you know, the dark room, whether it be color printing or black and white printing or whatever. The more I've worked in that space, the more I've become very fluent in the chemicals. Not only are they not necessarily the correct order, but they could be spent chemicals or burning or, you know, using a torch. So there was all these ways that I've found to manipulate and produce these objects now that aren't necessarily about printing an image. Like I guess I would say.
Yeah, I mean, both of you, it really worked so cinematic in so many ways for both of you. And I know that you've both worked in video as well. I'm going to skip over a question or two, because I think we're getting into a little bit close to the time. But I wanted to speak to writer Susan Stewart in her book on longing, Narratives of the Miniature, the Gigantic, the Souvenir, and the Collection, speaks to the secret life of things and their transcendence. You both rely on the element of chance and share an alchemical approach within the work. Where does your alchemy reside?
Do you need a slide?
No, I think I can just
I'm going to just go back and find something for you. Go
ahead. Yeah, I think, you know, again, it's the alchemy of materials, that the chance combinations, their interactions, but also, in a sense, controlled chance, or setting up conditions for things to happen. I actually well, maybe it's ones with light. I mean, it's funny, I haven't included the images of work that are more driven by chance. But I like the idea of chance because it's also a release of authorial, what is called authorial control. You don't have the same, it's a release of authorial intent and control. You don't have the same amount of control over it, and things can happen by accident. I mean, it's arbitrary, and it's the arbitrary and the accidental, and those things really interest me. So things can unfold that are process driven, and I think I work with that more now with light driven work, with just setting up conditions, puncturing metal, again, aluminum foil or other metal, and allowing the sun to go through the openings and cast a shadow, and really relying on the vagaries of weather and what might happen as the sun weakens or strengthens and causes the image to change. So chance does play an important role, either combination of materials or setting up conditions for things to unfold over time.
Yeah, and also, after you installed the work, the night stars were blinking in Morse code. I did remark to you that you scored the floor and shelves, and you said, "Oh, I didn't think of it that way." But it was like really fun to watch you sort of like walk through the shelves of the space and insert the pieces with Sivan.
Yeah, I mean, after you said that, I really like that that whole idea of scoring the space, and in a certain way, I mean, Sivan is definitely composing, but I too am composing with each element another note and finding the right composition in space. I actually do have 2 slides. I mean, actually,
They're at the end.
oh, they're at the end.
So
Okay.
just
Oh yeah. Well, how did I get there?
they're all the way at the end.
Of Sivan's scores. I mean, this one is actually
Oh, come closer. Your voice has disappeared.
Jean-Baptiste Lully, the Baroque French composer, and Sivan had altered his piece for the harpsichord. He had changed the tuning, but there were some extracts from the opera. And one of Sivan's older pieces it's essentially a graphic score. They were I hope you can see the title. I can no longer see it. But the players moved from room to room. It really was like a combination of an installation and a performance, and the sound changed. So he was scoring space as well as the specific notes, but he released authorial control because there are more instructions rather than a completely written out score, or so I recall. So this idea of scoring a space works for both of us. Yeah, I really like that. I like that term, or just that whole idea of scoring the shelves and the floor, especially in the library context.
Mm-hmm. I'd say that alchemy and transformation resides in my process and my thinking. And so, in the way in which I'm not only using the constant elements of all the things I've spoken about in terms of how I'm using process for the foldograms, there's this other alchemy that happens when I'm installing. And so this is an example of this foldogram is 35 feet long by 42 inches wide. This is another iteration. So this is iteration 5. There's now 8 iterations of this foldogram. So each time it transforms itself, and it takes the scarring and creases and folds from the time before, its history, and becomes part of its process for its newness, for its next iteration. So fold to gram, always there's a forward motion. Its own history makes itself the process makes itself from the beginning, its history makes itself, and so it moves forward. And this is a detail of that. Again, it's all those cracking of the lines you're seeing is the white of the substrate showing through the cracked emulsion. This is another, I think this is the 8th iteration, and this is the 7th, which was at, but it gives you an idea of how they're changeable, and chance is constantly an active participant in how I'm working.
You know, what's really was interesting for me too is I kept having visceral experiences for both of your works, even through Instagram, which I had never seen either of your works in person until now. And so it was really fascinating to see how I was responding, you know, like almost like a gasp, you know, when I would look through the works on for either of your accounts and also on websites. So yeah, and you use a whole roll of paper for some of these, and I can't imagine how you control the environment like this.
But I don't, you know, that's the whole, I'm not interested in control in that way at all. And so, you know, what you were saying about sunlight, you know, sunlight's played a huge part in a number of these. In this case, I did expose it to darkroom light. But in a number of the, well, like here, I'm going to go very quickly. Here we go. This one. Whoop. Oh yeah. So this is iteration 1 of the foldogram that's in the exhibition right now at Slash. So it's a different, obviously, configuration. And so you really get into, you know, looking at the surface. And so these strange colorations, that's from sunlight. Sunlight does a very other kind of thing to black and white, silver gelatin surface. And I've learned how to hold on to some of those things in the process. Yeah, there again, you have that changeability.
So I'm seeing that we don't have any questions at the moment. So I do have one more question, which is, what are the narratives that invoke the work, and what are you pushing against? It's kind of it's a little bit of a twofold, yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny, I don't usually think of my work in terms of narratives. It's more anti-narrative or non-linear narrative. There are no heroes or even anti-heroes, I don't think. But there are ways of making sense, and perhaps, you know, meaning relates to narrative. I'm more interested in sense in this, in relation to nonsense, or the rational and the irrational. So I think that's a reason why I use these sentence diagrams. So yeah, thanks, Troy, for putting that one up. So again, it's something about structure. As a matter of fact, I mean, I'm thinking about the Noam Chomsky, the linguist, and his famous sentence, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. It makes no sense to put them together, but it works rationally, logically. They are the proper parts of speech. But maybe, yeah, maybe they don't make sense, or maybe they make incredible playful sense and poetic sense. So in that sense, I'm using narrative, or maybe it's anti-narrative. I'm not really sure. And in terms of what I'm, that's also why I like the idea, again, of an opera of whispers, not as an opera. This is probably what I'm pushing against, and I'm going to find back to that practically. And not an opera, but maybe more like an opera in the sense that it was a spectacle, that definition of the opera. with voices, not really whispers, or not really voices, but with sound. So it was full of poetic contradictions. It was closer to a Dadaist cabaret, and it was kind of influenced by the triadic ballet. It was this piece that we did actually at Beeler Gallery, the same space where Joy and Fierce Pussy had their several seasons worth of work. This happened during an art book fair right before COVID hit, and things shut down. And it was a performance piece called Dots for John, Dashes for Emily, John Baldessari, Emily Dickinson, and punctuation for everyone. And it was a text and sound experiment, again, based on Morse code. So it could be thought of as a Morse code chorus, or a Dits and Das parade. So the texts were translations into Morse code of a quote from Baldessari and an excerpt from poetry from a poem by Emily Dickinson. And they were, chance was involved. It depended, they knew the basic rhythms of the dits and the das, how long each would be, and they would make sounds. Here's the same glass megaphone that actually functioned. Chicago uttered sounds through it, and Sadia played on there are a lot of toy instruments involved. There's that large cushion canvas ball once again, and some of those foil megaphones shapes, or cone shapes, or dunce cap shapes. So yeah, in a sense, I was pushing against any kind of true narrative, and entering into something more antic and playful and experimental with the vibe of a Dadaist cabaret.
In the beginning, shoot. Okay, sorry about this. We had to put everything together, and so we don't really know where anything is. Okay, here it comes, almost. Ooh, yeah, okay. So what I was going to say about narrative, I think that my film work, the film projects have more reference to narrative, of telling some kind of a story for me, which is based on my observation really of the everyday, how we move through the world, how we take it in. In this case, it was about my mother and her couch that we were selling. This was called For the Birds, and it was all about these birds that lived in this ivy wall behind my house here, and they would move through the leaves and fly in and out, and the video was all of that. And eventually I got to stage that in the Western desert of Egypt on these big rock outcroppings. And so to have this very verdant image that became the skin of the rocks with the birds flying in and out, it transformed into something else and told a different kind of story. Or in this is Les Psychoanalyses et les Marchés, is this almost hour-long video where you're seeing a market from an aerial viewpoint that I'm shooting from these psychoanalyst friends' apartment. And I spend my whole time basically dealing with the psychoanalysts while I keep changing the tapes. And it wasn't until I got the footage and started looking at it and then thinking about my time with the psychoanalysts from like 4 o'clock in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon, and what that was like. And so when you see this piece, you become the camera basically. So your eyes are seeing what the camera saw, and you're hearing a narrative from the behind the camera. So that narrative is playing while you're hearing the real sounds of the street. So I think that might be, so that was one way I was thinking about my approach to narrative. But then of course, my life and my work are inextricably entwined. And I think my perspective as a queer feminist artist and activist is constantly in the mix of how I'm thinking about not only my work, but how I move through the world. And I think I'm constantly pushing up against boundaries, and I'm trying to enlarge, push the envelope. And it's a celebration of otherness. I think I'm continually pushing against the status quo. I'm constantly trying to insert my perspective into the situation, to make room and to secure a kind of queer space while I'm trying to open up new avenues of ways of looking and inclusion and dialogue. And I feel that the foldograms give me this opportunity for this kind of subversion of space and change. And so that's my platform. It may seem quiet, but actually there's a lot going on.
Thank you. We do have some questions. I'm going to field from Carmen Winnett. First of all, says, brilliant work. Thank you for sharing. As a lapsed photographer myself, I'm interested in both of your unconventional approaches to photography, almost as for its capacity to be non-image. Why use photography as material, as process in this way, specifically as sculpture, as drawing, as essence? What can it do for you that no other medium can? Do you think of yourselves as photographers? Does that matter? It's a good question.
Well, I maybe have an easier time of it because I'm not a photographer. With this photogram project that, again, Joey Tang is the linchpin for, and Thomas Fougerolles, that was the first time I was ever in a dark room, other than maybe a day or two as a college undergraduate. So I have this odd relationship to photography, but I also kind of like it when people are amateurs or self-taught and they don't know the rules, so they they can break them all the time. I mean, I also deliberately break or subvert, I think subversion is important to both of us, rules to get somewhere else. But I only recently have been using the photograph, and not even the photograph, it's the photogram, so it's closer to drawing the way I use it, and a way of rendering permanent something that's extremely ephemeral, those light-based images that come and go with the sun. They did only exist as little images on my cell phone until they were translated into the photogram. And actually short videos. So I guess I'm creeping into the territories of photography and cinema, and collaborations with Luke Stettner, who is an incredible photographer and artist, using the Bolex camera. But I think my interest really lies with light and shadow, and how either the camera or the moving image or still image or the photogram can be an agent of these explorations. But again, since I'm really not, I can say wholeheartedly that I'm not a photographer. I can answer it one way, but Joy, how would you?
I kind of feel like I use photography. I use film. I use all these things to get to where I want to go. Yes, I'm a photographer because I do make photographs. I have made photographs, but I feel much more interdisciplinary, really. I feel that a lot of times it's really about what's the best way to get there? What's the best way to execute my idea? And what I found is that my preoccupation for so long of pushing both of these mediums of photography and the moving image into the sculptural zone, that's the place where I like to play. It's this intervening space. It's not here and it's not here, but it's somewhere in between. And I probably think in some ways that's the space I take up too. Maybe that's what I consider even queer space, or where I find myself in the world. And so I think I've found a way to work to help me be in the world and express that, and also make these possibilities of change and different iterations of something. So it's probably more of a tool.
But thanks,
And-
Carmen, for the question. Yeah, it got us thinking.
Yeah, thank you, Carmen. And then we have one more from Gina Osterloh, who were speaking your name earlier, Gina. So she says, hi, Suzanne and Joy. Can you share a little bit about your process installing the work at Slash? Were you both there in person sharing spatial relations? I'm also thinking of a call and response relationship between both of your works. Abstract calling to text, form and formlessness, a set of parameters, the size of your analog light sensitive papery, Joy, or the length of the word with your work, Suzanne. Sorry, this is a long question. Feel free to extract from any of this. Much love, Gina, and love you, Margaret. Thank you, Gina.
Well, is it a question, Gina, or is that statement's great and I really like it? I want a copy of it because I like that. I think that that's the dialogue that Suzanne and I have had through this entire situation. And yes, we were together in the gallery, and it was really interesting because, like, when we got there, even though we had seen pictures, it's always different once you're in the space.
Yes, actually, yeah, Gina, that's a great question. Yes, when we both adapted to this space, I mean, I think, yeah, we had different ideas, perhaps drafts of ideas going in just based on blueprints or whatever, images of the space, drawings of the space, but it was actually quite, you know, there are things that were different once we arrived. So we really did have to rethink you know, being respectful of each other's work, but wanting a dialogue with the work. And also we had to consider traffic. I mean, the pedestrian traffic, people moving in and out. As a matter of fact, I initially had ideas for two separate floor pieces, one based on punctuation and the other one with the floor diagram and the glass spheres, the Morse code with the glass and the metal leaf. But because we switched, you know, we adapted to the space, I ended up conflating the two. I mean, I combined elements from both punctuation and the night stars were blinking Morse code, and also angled it differently so that it had a relationship on the diagonal to, it led to Joy's piece and then vice versa. And also Sivan was in that space, and his headphones were important. And so that was another factor that we took into consideration, sort of leaving room on the shelf for the headphones, also making sure the cords didn't interfere with, you know, spectator traffic and movement. And also because of the headphones, I made certain decisions as to the placement of the elements. I mean, so I had a relationship to, more direct relationship to sound. So it was really almost a three-part choir there, you know, speaking to each other and bouncing off each other and into the space. And also, I mean, I had fun and helped with this sort of making those foil balls and kind of tossing them up to the upper reaches, the upper shells. Yeah, we definitely made decisions in situ that were different than initial ideas, but that's actually the thrill of being there. And I always liken it to you know, jazz, because you have to know your chops first, but then you improvise in the space.
I agree. I mean, I think that you're right, that the exciting part is the manipulation of working in the space, working with other people, you know, our dialogue back and forth, looking at each other's work. Also, the palette is pretty interesting. Yeah. I mean, there's a real play and consistency, in fact, that I don't think either of us totally realized until we were in the space. I think that there's this way, I mean, part of me thinks that I learned this very early on in my life, but also probably during my activist days in ACT UP, of like doing an action, so that, you know, you can plan things, but you really have to be in the moment. And I really have, that's become kind of a mantra for me. And so once I look forward to that moment of like, I can, make different things happen in my studio with any of these pieces, but it's not until I'm in the space of the exhibition and who I'm working with that those things are all going to impact how I end up proceeding. And that those manipulations and those considerations and decisions that I'm making are part and parcel to what I'm also receiving, as like the receptor, and then kind of channeling that into the piece. So I think that's all operative and alive. It's very alive. It's very in the moment.
Right.
Yeah. And it is like orchestrating or playing an instrument or making sound or making song or singing or, being in a band or something, there are these elements of that in the process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I do have one more question from an anonymous attendee, and humor seems to be embedded in the way to Suzanne. Okay, sorry. Humor seems to be embedded in the way you use materials and present the work. Do you often think about how your work could invoke certain kinds of emotional states, such as joy, mirth, relief, stress, etc.?
Yeah, well, humor definitely plays a role. I mean, those aluminum foil balls might be an example of it. Yeah, I mean, that's an important part. I mean, part of my interest in language relates to jokes and humor, and I'm actually, my whole family can attest, I'm not good at telling jokes, but I think the humor comes into my artwork with the strange and unexpected materials that I use and the combination. So in that, and I do think it's a form of play, and that's another reason why it's exciting to work in a space. I'm not an actor or a performer. I don't do performance artist, but in a sense, that's my performance piece. So it is playful, and at its best, it can be quite joyful as well. And hopefully this, carries over if I communicate this to the audience. But I think a lot of it is invested in the materials, not just foil, but history of using pom-poms or bubbles or what do you call pipe cleaners, all sorts of kind of odd things in combination that you might find, the toy instruments that you might find in other unexpected contexts.
Okay, well, thank you both. I guess I'll put us back with Anna. Is that correct, Anna? There you are.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, all of you.
Very generous.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This was such an engaging conversation. And thank you, Suzanne and Joy, for trusting us to show your works at Slash, and Margaret for curating this powerful exhibition. I also like to thank the audience for tuning in this evening. I know it's late, especially in East Coast. Just to wrap up, An Opera of Whispers is on view through March 23rd, 2024 in our library, alongside Transfiguration, the group show curated by Viet Le in our main gallery, and Remnants, a collaborative project by Tira Huyana Blackwater and Nuha Kaba in Rome, which was juried by Aaron Arbor and Jackie Im. I hope all of you will find time to come to experience the works by Joy and Suzanne in person. If you haven't already done so, if you have, please come back. And thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
May I interject? I know Suzanne has an opening in the next couple of days, right? You want to say a few words about that?
Yeah, it's actually a major project by the artist Luke Setner, whom I mentioned earlier, at the Mattress Factory in Pittsburgh. So he's collaborating with, I think, a total of 9 artists, and he and I worked on Bolex film and videos together. And yeah, it should be, a lot of it is predicated on ideas about the sun and SUN and the Sky, and based on some of the archives at the University of Pittsburgh, it should be a fantastic show. I mean, all pressures aside, I mean, it seems very exciting. I've been learning about what the other collaborators are doing. So it's at the Mattress Factory, and it'll be up for 2 years. And so it's another kind of show. Joy and I were talking about this idea of the possibility of returning and reconfiguring, you know, that something is not fixed or immutable, that it can change. There are things that are added and subtracted, and that's the philosophy behind the Mattress Factory show as well. So hopefully people can make it over there between the opening on the 17th and 2025.
We also have a link from Joy, which I will put into chat. Maxine, thank you, Maxine.
Yeah, it's in Ursula magazine. It was written by Ksenia Sablova about Arms Ache Avid Aeon, which is this project that has been curated by Joey Tang, and it includes the work of Nancy Brooks Brody, myself, Zoe Leonard, Carrie Yamaoka, and Fierce Pussy. And so it's this ongoing project that's in chapters. And so chapter 7 was at Palais de Tokyo. Chapter 8 is coming to participant in 2025. And the article in Ursula is about chapter 7. And I really appreciate what Ksenia wrote. I think it's it also talks to this whole idea, which is what the project's been about, of all these things. Well, first off, Joey recognized that the 5 artists had never shown together. And so these chapters have been the 5 of us showing and interworking with each other, so that the works work off of each other, and it can be work from the early 80s to the present. Things come in and out, things change. So there's a constant movement in it. And I think she did a nice job. The article. I was happy.
Thank you. Shout out to Joey again.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It was a fantastic evening. Thank you all for coming.
Thank
Also,
you.
Thank you.
yeah. All right.
Oh,
Bye.
have a good evening.
You
Sleep
too.
well.
Yeah. You too.